All right, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another Neo4j live episode. I'm very happy to kick this session off, and the topic is gamers, graph agents with multimodal entities and reasoning schemas. And if you expected this episode to be about video games or board games, you have unfortunately picked the wrong channel or the wrong session. Today we are actually going into healthcare, into the world of life sciences, and in the world of a very stubborn problem that everybody knows is like patient data that's not consistent, that's not really structured in a way that following systems can use in a proper way. Everything is scattered across different systems. Here's your scan, here's your patient report, here's a lab result, here's a note from a doctor. Nothing is consistent, nothing is connected, nothing is built upon each other or can contextualize. So everything is very isolated, very siloed. And so obviously the full picture is missing. And I'm super happy to have Julia and Krishnendu today join us, who are very much experts in the life sciences, in the healthcare AI business. And who are trying to untangle this mess a little bit with the G.A.M.E.R.S approach, which takes this clinical memory and the next level, I would say, by connecting entities, traverse disease hierarchies, have embeddings, graph embeddings in there as well, and all of it built on FHIR and the whole framework. So very much in the I would say the life science and the healthcare stack. So yeah, I'm super excited. I'm very happy. So welcome to the show, Julia and Krishnendu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexander. We are also very happy to present our G.A.M.E.R.S approach here today. And as you said, yeah, we'll take you deep into healthcare. And we chose patient to clinical trial matching specifically, not necessarily because it's easy. It's, on the other hand, probably one of the hardest disciplines that you can find. And we think once you actually solve this clear matching of patient data against very specific clinical trials, you actually have a foundation for many other types of questions, business processes in the broader healthcare field where you can apply this to. And patient recruitment is something Krish and I both worked in, so we can still feel the pain. And we definitely said we need to put technology towards it to relieve this pain from patients, but also for the many people in clinical research who need to deal with sifting through data and time-consuming steps in the beginning. For everybody who's not in the healthcare field, maybe just some numbers, roughly 80% of studies miss their enrollment deadlines. Screen failures, so having potential interested study candidates who then go through the screening process in the hope of being part of the trial, and then in the end not being qualified, actually runs somewhere between 40 and 60%. If you go into very specific oncology trials or rare diseases, can be even up to 70%, which is frustrating for everybody in the process, but it's of course also very expensive aspect in the whole clinical trial scheme. And more trials are actually being abandoned for not necessarily for patients want to be part of it, but safety and efficacy is, of course, also an aspect. And the more you know, the more you can screen upfront, the easier and more smooth the process will be in the end. So, as I said, the bottleneck is not necessarily the number of patients with the target conditions. And maybe, Krish, you can share your screen for the...
Yes.
Yeah, and
before I
Krish
hand over
ready.
And speak too much.
No worries. That's all good. While Krish is getting the screen share ready, and maybe also Krish, you want to say a few words about who you are before. I'd like to share. Obviously, this is live, so if you have questions, if you have comments, anything that is that you'd like to dive in a little bit more, use the chat. It would be nice to get a couple of questions and get some interaction going. And because you just mentioned it, the healthcare and life sciences being very diverse, being constant problem, I would say, with data integrity, data contextualization, and data analysis, I wanted to share that we recently did a Graph Talk Pharma with other stories, who's the link to all the content I've shared just in chat, as well as, because you mentioned it just now, Julia, is about rare diseases. Care for Rare is a customer story that actually tackles this challenge of finding, especially for kids diseases, if kids have rare diseases or something comes up, that is often a challenge to how to treat that, how to make kids well again with rare diseases. So maybe an interesting thing to look at. But let's dive in now. I'm seeing your screen. Let me get that on to our scene here, and let's go right in. Here we go.
Okay.
Maybe
so I believe that everybody's.
to
Am I audible?
Yeah, exactly. No,
Am
you
I
are.
audible?
It was just
Perfect.
audible. Yes, slideshow would be nice.
Yeah, I'll be doing the
We see
slideshow.
your.
That's not. Yes.
No, we see the. Oh no, it's coming. I think. There was a bit of a delay. Now it's here. All right. Let me switch to this one.
So I'm right now on the introduction slide. So that's what everybody's seeing, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you, Alexander. This is, in fact, a great opportunity to not just talk about what we are trying to build, but also to see the direction of where not only clinical AI, but the way how intelligence is facing, and how the intelligence is phasing in the different modalities. That is something what we are going to discuss today. Very quickly, I'm a computer science engineer, and I have over 16 years of experience. I have built AI systems. I have contributed to open source, and I've also been contributing towards NIST. I've been doing a lot of work on especially on the private AI. And one more thing that I have been completely focused on has been on the healthcare ecosystem and the cybersecurity landscape of it. I, along with Dr. Yulia, we have been working and been trying to understand the clinical landscape for last many years. And our working relationship goes back to almost 3-4 years, and close to 6 years, right from the time, and we have been working together since. What exactly are we discussing today? G.A.M.E.R.S. So before we go into the complete details of G.A.M.E.R.S, I want to talk about few terms that we are listening every day, right? And one of the things last year, I, along with Dr. Yulia, we presented at Nodes 2025, the Neo4j conference. And that time we were looking into the FHIR data, FHIR data, and we wanted to understand that how exactly memory is being, how memory actually works through all of this. And is there any way that if we can do something at the inference stage, if we can do something with the data to make it more proper in a reasoning standard? And I think it was only in the month of November, I think Dr. Omar from MIT created something called recursive language model. And we're going to show you something about RLM today. We are going to look into graphs. We are going to look into RLM. We are going to look into context. We are going to look into context intelligence, and also what people have been talking much about, which is agentic memory, what exactly it is and how it works. So, Julia, would you like to tell us the problem, because we are going to give it a storyline. So why don't you take us through the problem?
Yeah, sure. As I said before, the bottleneck and the problem we are tackling is not necessarily the number of patients with the target conditions for specific trials, but it's actually identifying the right one. And the evidence needed to decide whether a patient meets a criterion almost always exists, just somewhere, as Alexander said in the beginning, right? Healthcare has really simply very fragmented data silos most of the time. And this slide shows 4-way inclusion fragments, right? It's the multimodal silos, it's often has a loss of context between encounters. You visit different physicians. Even if you have an electronic patient record, that's not necessarily always 100% correct. Then you have the clinical semantics, and if you apply AI, quite often you have flat retrieval, and that means also missing relationships. So looking at this is also most common one of the failure modes, even if you have early AI applications in this context, just because it's a general weakness of most of the clinical AI applications that are out there today. And in clinical trial matching, these four together become really fatal, and that's exactly why the G.A.M.E.R.S approach is a very good instrument. It's the setup and the architecture is multimodal by design and also by necessity, temporal, and the compositional setup between the interdependent criteria always helps to be clear and provide the evidence, have a full audit track to see how the reasoning of the AI worked, and you can go back anytime to have actually a closer look at the primary data that's underneath it. That's also a requirement in highly regulated industries, right? If you say, well, there are the frontier models out there, well, yes, but parsing all this information, even if you would have a local requirement, a single document model usually cannot distinguish from the missing evidence that you still have in the patient profile or a negative evidence. So that is actually the hardest part in the clinical trial matching, because if you just check off a list of, yes, I have information on this, then it's easy to say whether it's right or wrong. But if you're missing information, quite often that actually leads to errors and the whole problem in terms of qualifying this. So in the end, it's not necessarily a tool to better summarize why a certain ID is worth a match or not, but you actually need a really good context, make it completely audit proven, have the system check every context, and the graph-based approach is actually really great for it. Krish, do you want to dive deeper into the technical details?
Yes, thank you so much, Julia. So as we said, thank you, Dr. all your expertise for like close to 20 years, and being a scientist by training also helps us to design these kind of ecosystem. So we looked into the problem, could be the solution part of it. So this is where G.A.M.E.R.S come in, right? So as we say, the solution was to not just look into one modality, not to treat one particular patient or one particular data as a point, but also to look into the side that how we can create relational entity. And when we do that, if we are deriving relation through graph, what is stopping us to actually create reasoning based on each of these relations that gets established? So that's where we created something called G.A.M.E.R.S. It's a framework, and we will also go through a wonderful demo. We are going to show you something amazing real time. So G.A.M.E.R.S, as we said, G stands for graph. We are using Neo4j for all our, we're using Neo4j database for storing everything. State that when we go through, we're not only looking at the policies which are required for the governing reasoning models or the governing reasoning capabilities, but also the EU AI Act. So I don't know how many of you are aware that EU AI Act was being passed last year, but there has been a recent update on August 2nd, 2026. So we incorporated that as well, that how agents can interact, what language models can do, and that policy sits inside the graph, so that each time when a graph nodes make a relationship with other, it goes through the policy and then it actually does the entire work. We have agents. For the agents, we are looking into different kind of agents, and we'll go through that. One is to understand the context. One is to understand, when I say context, that's not just the context of the clinical trial, but also the context of the patient. And then what we do is we look into the discoverable part of it, that we will show that how a particular patient's data, if we want to find a particular clinical trial, how do we make sure that they are discoverable for both and for each other? Then comes the agents for trial, the medication, the decision, the trajectory services, and coordinated governed workflows. Then we are looking into multimodality part of it. And when I say multimodality, we are getting the data in FHIR format, like fast, health, interoperable resources format. And we also have imaging data. We have clinical biomarkers, which are basically like numbers. And we are going to create all of this, and we're going to use it as an entity and try to reason them together. And at the end, we want to create a schematic approach whenever we try to chat with the interface without knowing that what the people or the clinicians, they would not know that what exactly is hitting, but it will go through all the modalities, through all particular graph nodes, through different reasoning. And when I say reasoning, it goes through traversal. And the RLM part of it, RLM and memory in a while. Imagine every time when you go and visit a hospital, every time when you go and visit a hospital, your disease that has been diagnosed, your clinical examinations are temporal in nature. So imagine that if you have a temporal data, doesn't your age need to be temporal in nature when it comes to memory? It's not just in the context of the memory, but holding the temporal nature of the context of the memory becomes more relevant and more important in this entire ecosystem. So this is our latest architecture that we're looking at right now. So I'm actually presenting it from there. So that's why I'm looking at the side, not to the camera. So the first thing, let me tell you, environment. What exactly have? So 21 pages, they are completely simple images, real images.
Sorry, Chris, to interrupt, but is it just me, or is its audio quality not quite? I don't know, Julia, can you confirm? For me, it's a bit difficult to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the last minute was a bit lagging for me as well.
Okay. Is there a way you can, I don't know.
Is it
Do you have another network to connect to or something? I don't know. Yeah, hopefully. Let's see. But yeah, okay. Let's try.
The horror of whatever we do, the horror of everything comes back to networks, right?
It does, yes.
I'm connected to a good network, I don't know. So if it lags again, just let me know, but please do interrupt.
Okay. Now it's better. Now it's better.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, where was I? Yes, the system architecture I was just saying, right? So when you look into it, the entire patient data that we have over here is completely synthetic in nature that we're looking at. But apart from that, all the ontologies that we are going to see, there are 5,000 clinical nodes. There are more than 42,000 relationships. And there are 37,000 ICD-11 nodes. ICD is International Classification of Diseases, and it's an ontology graph network, or you can say that would be, normally it's a hierarchical disease pattern. Now over here, when we look into system architecture, the first part is data and model. This is where we are looking into a different kind of data format. We are trying to understand what this data actually entails. Now for this, if you look into it, we are using Met-Gemma and Met-Siglib as the upper layer, but when we actually process the data, when we actually run the agent, we run everything through completely open source and local models. So we are running it through Gemma, we run it through liquid AI models, And all these agents, they interact with their own skills through different models, but the final decision when it comes to understanding to give a clinical context, that obviously goes through G.A.M.E.R pipeline. The SIGLIP is normally used and essentially being used as an embedding layer, an embedding model on top of the other embedding models that already have in the system. The clinical graph talks about the patient and encounter. Encounter is something which normally happens through the entire thing. And then we have the context and memory. This is very interesting. This is where the entire graph ecosystem works. Context gateway is something that we created as a pipeline. Now, imagine that when a patient comes in and that patient has 2 years long record, they have some clinical examination, they have some temporal data, and their disease pattern could be either acute or it could be actually a chronic disease. Now, let's say the disease identification was being done 5 months back, but now when they do a clinical examination again, that doesn't hold the context. It says that, okay, maybe I had a fever, and for that fever, I was being given a dosage of paracetamol. But today, I don't have a fever, and the context of paracetamol as a medication in my current context would not make much sense. So it does not look into the context of it, but it also looks into why that context was important. And this is where we are using RLM. That's why the recursive reasoner as a framework that we use as a complete gateway that we're using. And that's with the reasoning. Every time when it tries to make a decision, it goes to the context, try to reason to it, creates a decision metric out of it, and then finally it goes and gives out the clinical reasoner as a part of my application, which could be a dashboard or even the output of a LLM. So the knowledge graph schema, as I said, we have something called FHIR, which is basically a standard. In this, we have patient encounter, conditions, and observations and everything. Then we have the ICD-11 ontology. Now, before we go a little bit deep into this, let me state this, that there are multiple medical standard or ontology standard or clinical standards which are out there. Just for this demo with Neo4j, we are actually presenting only 2 of the ontologies that we can show, which is ICD-11, which is by WHO, and the other is again APC-DDD, which is again part of WHO. Now, there are other coding standards like ICD-11, SNOMED, LOINC. All of them can have their own relational and hierarchy standards. And that's very important when it's come to ontology ecosystem, because whenever you define your categories or entities, the distinctions are being done not based on semantic similarity. It is made sure that how sure are we that this is a particular disease that has been identified. And that makes a lot of sense when we look into an ontology layer. The medical terminology layer, which is for completely medication, is coming from RxNorm, which has its own concepts, which is anatomical therapeutic classification concepts, which supports your medical identity. And through that, you can actually look into other part of the medical layer. The interesting part from the engineering part of it comes the agent memory and the policy layer. This is where we look into a memory episode. Now, what is a memory episode? As I said, every time, and this particular framework that we're talking about is not just relevant for medical, this is very much relevant in cybersecurity as well. Every time when we say that a certain function has happened, you create a memory episode for that when the agent interacts. And that agent, when it interacts for that particular patient or that node, it creates a memory. And it creates a memory that what was the recursive language model referring to, what was the reasoning, and it creates a memory episode as a context with the decisions and keep on it. So the next time when the agent hits, it actually goes and hits the memory as well. And then it takes a better reason again. The pipeline is as something like this. This is the current V4E pipeline. We have an ingest. We ingest the data, we extract, we ground it to the ground truth, we link, which is where the Neo4j comes in a huge way. We persist. Now, one of the most important thing is that every time when a memory, when we do a memory graph, and every time an agent looks into it, it creates its own memory graph as well. And at that time, we persist not only the graph, but also the memory episode and create nodes out of it. And then finally, when the reason is being done, that reason goes out as the last stateful agent, that this was the last stateful part of the agent which was doing. Coming to the stateful agent runtime, what is happening? So as we said, we created this context gateway where we are looking into current patient evidence, and it looks into the temporal nature of it. Then we have memory, which retrieves prior episodes. Now, episodes are the memory episodes for the agent, like, whether it has been done, whether there has been a new, change in the data. So everything will change accordingly. And then we have something called recursive reasoner, where the RLM critic or the evidence check happens. This is where we look into different. This is where the REPL, REPL environment is set up. It looks into, the agent looks into it, and it tries to reason with all the particular information that it's gathering. So it is not just like, you pass a data to an LLM or a set of trial or a set of patient to LLM. It tries to reason with each of the reasoning structure or the reasoning approaches that we have put into it. Then goes to the policy graph, which this is where the human review and the safety rules comes in. And for every single aspect of it, we know, and I would say that healthcare is one aspect that whatever be the state of intelligence, right, we would always need a qualified clinician or a doctor to review it before that actually takes into the process or the impact of it. Now, that gives us a question, then why all of this? This gives the clinician a better understanding of what has come through, or if there is something that has missed the entire pipeline or the timeline of the patient or the treatment or the way how patients' data should be looked at. That is what we're trying to give to the clinicians to understand. But the final, the decision is always being dependent on the qualified doctors and professionals because of their expertise. That's where the decision and the trajectory comes in, that what is the record outcome and the evaluation. Now, when we say evaluation, we do run our own eval metrics to make sure that we check that how can we understand that whether the decision is kind of going not in a wrong way, but it is making sure that it is creating the right decision framework or the structure. And when everything happens, the agent goes and writes into the memory, which is the memory and persistent new episodes, and this keeps on happening. Why this is important? Again, this entire stateful agent runtime is important because this is a governance invariant. Now, when I say governance invariant, this is where the entire stateful agent runtime is a part of the EU AI Act, or if I may say that more of the regulated industry or the government are going to go with this. Why this decision was being taken by the AI, what made you think to take the decision, and why did the agent do that? And for that, there has to be the evidence of what the agent did and keep it as such and not just do it as a one-time. The canonical evidence finalization is something that we look into it. This is where I'm going to go to our demo. Where we look into, this is again something with the clinical side of it, when I say. So for example, when we have clinical trial, there are criteria, inclusion and exclusion criteria. And for each of this criterion identifier, we have a source evidence, we do an assessment. And then for the confidence, we make sure that it is at a confidence score between 0 to 1. There is a deterministic finalization rule. The rule is as simple as that. Whatever be your inclusion criteria, if you have one exclusion criteria, you will definitely be excluded from it. It means that, when you apply for a visa, there are certain things that you should have, which is must have, you should have, for you to be included for your visa application. But imagine that there are some strictly no, that if I find one of these against your application, I'm definitely going to deny you entry in a country. So think on that way. So it's as hard as that when it comes to clinical trial as well, because if there is one exclusion, that exclusion should not let the patient be part of a trial or a therapeutic treatment, because that itself will be a way which is completely challenging the aspect of what the clinical trial stands for. There are three hard invariants that we're looking at. One is that the exclusion pass requires direct evidence, and the evidence is something that we are going to look in the demo. Unresolved required evidence is basically indeterminate. It does not mean that if you cannot find out, it doesn't mean that you do not meet or not met. It is just indeterminate. It's in an insufficiency phase. The RLM cannot override evidence traces. That is something. The RLM will always look into the fact of it, what it can do, rather than to look into the evidence traces, because it cannot override. The current evidence is rechecked in every run, and the human review remains required through and through. The cohort intelligence, this is the slide which has a lot of things over here that we want to talk about. And in this particular slide, when we talk about the cohort intelligence part of it, just a minute. Where is So on the heterogeneous clinical graph, so always notice that when we are treating the data that we have, heterogeneous clinical graph, we have immutable features, which are like clinical lab or biomarkers. We have terminology flags, we have image vector. And for these vectors, what we are getting at, first of all, we do not treat any patient as a feature vector. So that's why we want to make sure that it's not just one feature vector. We use it as a compositions of different vectors altogether. And the most important part is that the immutable feature, the temporal feature, is very, very important. That how do we do it? And that is one of the key things, how the reasoning or the evidence are being mapped into it. The leakage hardened training that we are looking into, this is where the GNN, the graph neural network training that has happened through. And on that, we train only on the message graph and through multiple seeding. And we take a specific, AU ROC, if you look into it, we had a 0.93. And then we have a very specific enriched RGCN on top of it. So, let's go to a demo version now.
Cool. Oh, that's very
interesting. I'm just sharing my demo screen right now. Just a minute.
Yeah, let me get that here. Here we go.
Okay, perfect. Is it visible? No.
Yes.
Is this better? The white better, right? Okay.
The white is better, yes. A better contrast, yes.
Thank you. So, sorry. Okay, yeah. So what we are seeing right now is something which is the G.A.M.E.R platform. And before we go and run something, let me tell you what we have over here. There are a list of 21 patients that we're looking at. This is the patient roster. And each of these patients, if I go over here, they are different patients which are there. And these are all real time. And everything is basically real. The graph networks, as I said, everything is running live in a local environment. Now, let's say for each of the patient, we have over the timeline, when we look at the timeline, this is from the evidences of the FHIR, which is basically their hospitalization record and everything. We identify what conditions they have been, what kind of medication they have been given, what kind of encounters. Encounters are basically, it could be like a, outpatient, inpatient, emergency. Do they have any images data? If they have an image data, then the interpretation of the image as it is, and then the clinical lab parameter or the biomarker. So what does the first overview looks like? This is where we look into the patient summary. Now, if I say that this entire structure or this entire statement that you look into it, this is not just coming from a language model or just by using an LLM. This is coming from the entire graph ontology, the context. And every time, if there is a new evidence, new medication, or a new, the clinical records, because it has to be making sense that what the patient, what's cohort intelligence, the different patients who are like, similar mechanisms or similar cancer. That's why if you look into it, this patient is PBR01. Again, these are all synthetic names. There are no such name. And if there is a name which is coming through is completely coincidental, these are all synthetic names. So, and the data as well, right? So 0.996, this is coming from that how these patients are close to each other in terms of their primary evidence of breast cancer. And that's why we keep them as cohort, because when we look into clinical trial, the first cohort comes into is the primary evidence or the primary evidence of the disease, and that's where the cohort comes in. The active conditions which are there in ELENA as per the identification of the FHIR data has been through like malignant neoplasm, thyroiditis, anxiety, and iron deficiency anemia. And the certain medications which are being mentioned over here are the list of all the medications which have been provided to ELENA, right? What is the timeline? The timeline is basically from like, it goes all the way from the top to like to the latest one. The latest one, when I say today, we keep today as the latest, as in not today as the date, but the latest data that we look into when we do any kind of demo or try to do understanding or analysis onto it. But then this also gives us one important thing, because when we look into the temporal aspect of it, this is the temporal aspect which we look into. Now, before you say that how we are getting this data, this all data comes from FHIR. It's again a FHIR as a format. It's completely a FHIR JSON format data. And through that, we gather and we structure it in this way. In the nodes, when we create nodes, the primary nodes become patient, and all of these are sub-node, and they are relational to it, that on this particular date, what really happened. That the relation could be an evidence. It could be, for example, what kind of what kind of encounter was it? It's an outpatient encounter. It was an outpatient. It was an inpatient. These are basically. Then we have labs. These are the lab data. So as I said, there are a particular lab point, and all of these points have their own thing over the 3 encounters or the clinical biomarker collection date. It also gives all the latest data that we are looking at, so that it can, at any point of time, if the clinician wants to look into it, they look into the latest biometric, which is also the graph also tells a lot about it. The imaging, it compares a pathology report and a radiology report. We can look into the raw file, and just a minute. Oh, wait. Yeah, we can look into the raw file, and then also when we look into radiology reports and the pathology report, which are again, so these all data are not just coming from one model, but also from the model which we find are clinically evident, either trained by us or being trained by NIH, or which has been out in the open source, and we use that to just see that how it basically these biomarkers report are coming true or not. We do an evidence and we do an evaluation. Post that, we compare our results with the proprietary closed source model, and we have found out it to be either at par, or sometimes our results are even better, not at the pathology report, but to understand the whole matching, then I say. This graph is not your traditional graph interface. We always look into graph interface, but this is something which we thought that it will be very easy when we look into like a way how we can demonstrate the relational entity to a clinician, that what kind of conditions and has medication onto it, and the treatment pathways which are there. Then the clinical chat will come to work. Then the trial match is basically the most important, and today's the brownie thing, what I would say. The agent activity is something that we are going to look into it. We are looking into terminology. These are basically the basic terminologies which are out there with RX norm drug ontology. So I can search for a concept. And when I say there are 432 concepts, this doesn't reflect the world numbers. These reflect only the concepts that are present in the current database for the 21 patients identified with the medication that has been mentioned in their clinical report. These 37,000 nodes or entities are basically the complete hierarchical pre-structure of ICD-11 from WHO, and that is where we look into it, and the hierarchical graph structures are being related from these nodes particularly. The audit and stats, these are there are 5,000 nodes as of today. There are 65,971 relation or edges that we look into it. So before we do a clinical chat, let's do a trial matching and see something. Now, this is a patient, and what we are looking over here is we see that there are there are 6 particular agent structures that we're looking at, one human review. Let me tell you this activity for that. It will take a time. It's going to run and then. Okay. So the patient, the last agent when it ran, right? So we have a PCM ID, which we call it for that. And then we have a patient context agent. Now, when I say patient context agent is to understand what the patient is about. What is everything about the patient, right? Over the time, and it could be temporal in nature, it could be everything. Then comes the trial discovery agent. Now, this is where we are not just calling a particular, we just don't call one particular discoverable trial, but we also look into that what could be the different clinical trials that can match to a particular patient by understanding and create a discoverable metric between the patient and the trial. And this is for each of the trial. And based on it, then we run, which is the closest one, and then we try to find the match. The protocol evidence is basically we look into the criteria. Now, this is where the most interesting part comes in, because protocol evidence, clinical reasoning, policy, and the memory, they work hand in hand. They work parallel. This is not like a sequential, because each of the protocol criteria, it could be one criterion. And when it runs on one criterion, it tries to reason through. It goes through the policy. It tries to understand what policies are being applied for that particular criterion. And then it writes into the trajectory and the memory agent. And all these 4 agents work together. Now, let's say we do a complete demo, right? So let's discover and evaluate. Now, if you see, I just ran through. The first is it completed the context and the discovery. Now, while it is running, let me tell you what had happened. So right now, what we are doing is candidate NCTs. Now, NCT means National Clinical Trial IDs. These are clinical trial as being published by the government of US, and also it is one of the largest registry when it comes to clinical trials. Now, when we look into it, these are the clinical trial ID. This number is the retrieval relevance to it, right? For this particular patient, what could be the to it? And when we say retrieval relevance, we are also looking into a fact whether it is recruiting or whether it is what phase is it recruiting or including what phase. If it is there, it is fine. But the most is that also look into and see that what could be the ideal part of it and how it is approaching towards it, right? Now, the next comes as the looking from the relevant side of it. As you see that over here, I'll go back to the first it made, but before that, the agent is still where the retrieval relevance is a particular because since running on totally different of local, you can see if you have, you can actually in parallel. For right now, I'm running it using two particular local views, and they are running four models altogether, different clusters. Now, when we look into this, before we dive a little bit deep into this, let me take you the agent activity, that what is the stateful agent right now doing while a particular agent is already running. So every time when it runs, if you look into it, these two become green and the rest one are red, which means that a particular event is actually running. And this is where we say that which event or which state for that event is running. And if you look into it, just from the context over here at this particular time, it says that, okay, we are we ran the context, then we look into the context, which is complete, the discovery running, discovery complete. And if you look into it, all of this, which are there, protocol and evidence, it is running. But if you look into it, again, if you see protocol and evidence running, what it means is that it is when it's trying to do a protocol and evidence map, it doesn't really write. And every time it finds a new thing, it will go and write into the memory, right? And it also, but policy is something that it will always call once and keep it, because the policy has to be there for the entire timeline while the project, from the agent is running. But the memory has to be updated whenever there is a new discoverable part of it, or the new way how the protocol or the evidence matching has been done. So it keeps on running till it finally matches something. So since I've started the entire thing, it will keep on running. So it has run around 2, it will run another 3 or 4. But before that, let me take you through what has been identified so far, and why we are saying that why graph is so important when it comes to context memory or context graph, or recursive language model or RLM there. We are doing, if you look into it, there are, so NCT over here, it had different criteria. So met 1, not met 0, insufficient 4. So there were total 5 criteria or 5 criterion that we have been looking at, and each of these criterions are as such. This is the traceability, because this is where we look into the trace of the evidence, when the evaluation, what was the evaluation being done, and the traceability helps us, or help the RLM or the agent memory to go back and look into the trace and see what it was done. Now, let's say we look into this. Okay, so if I so if you look in, it's still running right now. Okay, so let's see how much time it will take. Just a minute, I'm just checking that it stops running. Okay, so when we look into each of these variable values over here, when we say that the for example, the rules applied. Okay. So one of the things is that the reason why it is every time it is refreshing, because it's a real time and it updates the memory in the real time for the entire agent trace. So it not only updates one thing, so that's what's getting refreshed and it gets closed down, right? Again, a UI issue, I need to fix it, but it's fine. But if you look into it, one of the things what we're looking is that the patient, if I say 35-year-old, which is very fine, 43, evaluated finalization hardening and the current patient evidence only. Let's look into one of a complex thing, right? Okay, now this particular thing, it says malignant neoplasm unspecified on the left female breast. Now, what is the reasoning that it has found out, and why, where it is finding the RLM? Because it's not just trying to find out that there is a word called cancer, and I will say that, hey, the patient has a cancer. It specifies the left female breast. And if that particular thing is not being mentioned in the clinical record or in the imaging data, this will not make sense, because the patient evidence does not explicitly state the diagnosis of breast cancer or the carcinoma. The patient has a history of malignant neoplasm unspecified left minor, but this is not specific diagnosis of the breast cancer per se. So it says the patient has a history, but it doesn't specify the complete diagnosis on it. The same thing when we look into radiotherapy, these are different things where they look into the therapeutical thing. Now, if you look into this, this is where the evidence is a direct evidence, which is coming from a condition. So condition is a node, and that's where it comes through. But when it finds a therapeutical treatment, it looks into a medication request, which is part of the treatment modalities. And that's where it starts to look into what is there in the treatment. Unfortunately, for the treatment, the only treatment which was being given was the medication, and it tries to find, and then the reasoning comes in that does not contain very specific information whether the patient is planned for radiotherapy, because the evidence is not there and evidence is required to resolve. The same thing when we go into the other part of it that keeps on going, that the evidence is not there in that particular patient. Coming to, let's say, the criterion evidence, when we look into the canonical criteria evidences, the inclusion, this was the inclusion criteria which was there. The clinical reasoning summary is there. What was the rule that was being applied? And finally, the evidence consistency, whether it was pass or fail. Now, the same thing when we go to another particular match, and if you look into it, it says the protocol evidence score is 6.7% match, because most of the time it's insufficient as per se as we look into it. So even if we look into, let's say, for this particular patient, the patient locally advanced breast cancer or locally recurrent. Now the reasoning says the provided evidence, again, the evidence is from the clinical record, does not contain explicit information on the patient's disease stage or the history. This is where the temporal part of it comes in, that how soon or how sooner it will be. I'll try to find out a temporal thing which says in the last 1 year. I want to show the temporal aspect of it. Let me quickly see if we have particular one thing which talks about a timeline, like in last 1 year or something. Okay, let's take this example. Patient have a negative mammography or breast ultrasound within 12 months from the study enrollment. Now, the thing is, if we don't use the temporal aspect of the nature of the data, it will say the patient having like the study enrollment. Now the reasoning say does not contain explicit information, the test within the specified 12 months time frame. Recent lab section, various lab, but not explicitly labeled a mammography or a breast ultrasound, do they include a date within the required 12 months window? This is where the temporal aspect of it comes through, not just from the data perspective of the clinical, but also from the imaging part of it, because it just not look into, if you again do, the reasoning was not just being done by the FHIR record, but also like from the record which says not labeled on that data. So it looks into, it goes back, calls the multimodal imaging model, does the imaging, looks into it, tries to find out, because in most X-rays, there is a date parameter. Even if it is being missed in the primary like record source, it should be there in the primary image data. This is where the entire thing comes in. And if you look into it, the rules applied says temporal criteria required explicit dated or duration evidence. This is what we think is G.A.M.E.R.S, and this is what we think can be done much better in the field of clinical reasoning or in the field of clinical evidence in the world coming forward. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Krish. That was super cool. We have still time for a couple of questions.
I'm sorry, I went overboard.
I'd like
close through.
Yeah,
There are a few more amazing things which I wanted to show. Like, how do you, like when you chat, it actually gives a real-time evidence on the chat as well. But I said, okay,
Cool. Yeah. No. Because you just finished on temporal data, I think there was one question from Brett Boy, and they asked, you mentioned having temporal data and extracting nodes based on latest timeline labs. How do you ensure cross-feature clinical compatibility by aligning the validity window of different biomarkers? Is that something you can? I think you maybe with the timestamps on the images, you showed a little bit how you do it,
can
but
you
with
share,
other.
Can you share me the question? Where is? Oh, okay. I can see you mentioned having temporal data and extracting nodes. Okay, and okay, why RLM is better than LLM? Yes, so there are two questions right now. I'll go one by one. So I will first look into the temporal data, extracting nodes based on latest
Yes.
timeline lab. How do you ensure cross-feature clinical compatibility by aligning the validity window of different biomarkers? Very good question. And this is something when I say that it is not just like a temporal data point, this is where the domain comes in. For example, there are two kinds of diseases, right? Acute and chronic. So this is 658. I'm answering to you. So two kind of there are different structure of diseases. We have rare diseases, we have chronic, we have acute. But let's say when you have an acute disease and it's not a chronic in nature, acute is short temporal, chronic is over the time. For example, if you have like a blood pressure, right, or if you have diabetes type 2, like not you per se, like hopefully not nobody, but if somebody has a type 2 diabetes, that is like so far is going to be in the person's life for very long. But let's say that person is already being treated with some medication, right? But at that point of time, there has been a certain acute disease which has been identified or diagnosed for that patient. And for that patient, when it happens, we need to see that what was the medication which was given to that, what kind of biomarkers which were given to that. So for that point, if a patient who has a high blood pressure has been administered or has controlled their blood pressure with medication, but let's say there has been a certain event or there has been a certain illness because of which the blood pressure was completely off the chart, this was not because of the treatment which was being given for the for the blood pressure disease, but for the acute or for the acute disease that was suffering from. This gives us a way why it is completely temporal, because what is the latest on the decision that we are taking is based on the latest context that we are holding. So think of this, that every time a temporal decision is being made, it is made from a context to that temporal decision. I hope I answered your question, but happy to take this again. If you can put it out on the YouTube link or wherever the link is live, I can explain it to you in a much more detailed way.
Super.
I see another question. Can I quickly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I see another question.
Let's take the.
Oh.
I think one more from previously. I'd like to also answer because I think this is interesting for more people. Is there a way people can try this somewhere? Is there a website? Is there a demo? Is there some kind of maybe a repository where people can look at what you've built? Is there a plan for it? Maybe not yet, but maybe in the future to release this somehow.
Yes, we have. For that, Julia, could you please let us know how are we going to demonstrate future releases?
Yes, of course. We are always looking for partners who want to develop this further with us. As you saw, this was all synthetic patient data, and everybody who worked with synthetic data before knows the challenges. So we, of course, would be happy to dive a little bit deeper. Everybody who has either access and also consent to further explore data sets or has data sets to compare our approach against their own work, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we find a way to access the demo version for both of us.
Yeah. And yeah,
makes sense. Thank you.
Julia. And yes, you can host it yourself. The framework is as such that we made it sure that it falls under the EU guidelines. Again, thanks EU for that, to be so stringent that we put everything on the local part of it. So yeah, there are two more quick questions that I think we can take those. One is, can you explain, Shambhavi has said, can you explain why RLM is better than a choice than any LLM? So the thing is that when you look into a language model with a memory which is there, for example, if you look into any proprietary model today, right? When you use it and you compare it, like, with the time when it was launched, right? It was not temporal in nature. It didn't have the context. It didn't make a decision. Now, when you look into RLM today, and it's not like, better than any LLM. RLM is being used as a layer on top of the LLM interface, right? The reason is what we showed in the demo, what we showed real time happening is the recursive language model interface helped in not only creating a decision, but also helped into understanding that what context decision. That's why when it was age, it was going to the age or the demographical factor. When it was a condition, it was going to the condition node of graph. When it was a treatment, it went to the treatment and medication node of the patient. That's where your reasoning makes sense. And it is very important that anybody today, if you're working, your memory, your context memory, your graph nodes, and your RLM, they should all work together. You should treat them as one particular interface layer where they can talk to each other. And once they have done enough talking and understood one reference, that's where the agent is going to call it. And then you create a memory of that agent and create it as your context memory so that you can create your context graph on top of those memory nodes as well. So that when I say that, okay, Krish had a disease 1 year back and he has been treated, it should also make sense that what was the context for that disease? Was there any precursor? Was it like a defining factor of a chronic or a particular acute disease, or was it like a temporal in nature? Was it like just as what I say, like a rare event that just happened, right? So that's where the idea of RLM with the context gateway makes a lot of sense. I hope I answered your query, Shambhavi Agarwal. If you have anything, please reach out to us. Happy to talk more about this.
Super, perfect. Thank you very much, Krish and Julia. That was amazing. Super cool session. Very informative, interesting demo as well. I was very excited. I was looking forward to this, and I wasn't disappointed. So it's really cool stuff. So like Krish and Julia said, if you have anything, if you are interested in working in the same field, maybe have data, or maybe have a challenge that goes in the same direction, reach out to them. The LinkedIn connection is also in the YouTube video description, as well as on the LinkedIn video as well. So I think you can both reach out. You can reach out to both of them with questions or with contact information, and then get in touch about the latest about the using this for yourself. And yeah, if you are interested in hearing more, I mean, Krish, you mentioned it in the beginning. You looked at this in last year. It's August already, so November is coming close. Even though at some parts, if you look out of the window, you cannot really imagine it's going to be cold again. But that's what we are. It's coming around again, so we're looking forward to another great session in a couple of months. Yes. So if you're interested in that, keep it locked on Neo4j. And yeah, in the meantime, if you want to explore yourself or even learn yourself, check out the Graph Academy with interesting courses, and go and explore yourself if you like, with Neo4j Aura free, giving you the possibility to spin up your own database as a service and get your hands on Neo4j and graphs.
Yeah.
And yeah, with that, we're at the end. Again, Julia, Krish, thank you very much for being here today. And thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I hope I'll see you soon again in another live stream, another event around the world.
Absolutely.
Next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for every viewer, I would say today, when we talk about LLM as a decision maker, we trust LLM so much, or we use different kind of AI as a decision maker. I would say, for me, AI is all about collective decisions, and collective decisions comes from collective intelligence. And if you understand that, always sits on nodes, that always sits on graph. So graph is going to be the most important thing when it comes to collective evidence or collective intelligence.
Amazing. That was a very nice ending sentence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.